You're listening to Cooper Talk.
Welcome to Cooper Talk. I'm your host, Steve Cooper, and remember, I'm only as hip as my guests. And I got to tell you something, people. You know, I mentioned that Joanne had her bridal shower last week, and one of the things we got, and I mentioned I was excited about, was this pineapple cutter. And I'm going to tell you something. I like pineapple. It's great for you, but it's always a pain in the ass to cut. So we got this thing, and I tried it last night, and I couldn't be happier. You cut the top of the pineapple off. You stick in this blade, and you just spin it around, and you'll pull the whole inside out, and the core and the shell, I think that's what it's called, stays, and it's already in rings. So it's amazing. Now if I could just find a mango cutter, I'd be in heaven. Anyway, we have a great show today. Very excited to have this gentleman on. He was the lead singer and I guess he's basitarist. I'm not good at, I'll ask him the exact pronunciation, of the President of the United States of America. And he's also a children's artist named Kaspar Babypants. And from his emails, I can tell he seems like a really nice guy. And my guest is Chris Ballew. How you doing, Chris?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Steve.
No problem. Now, I see I called you Ballew, and we just said this. It's Ballew.
It's okay. You know what? It's one of those names that just gets constantly butchered. So I became, sort of insensitive to the massive, variety of ways you can pronounce it a long time ago. So it's fine.
Okay, I don't want to. And now, how do you pronounce basitarist? Basitarist? How do you pronounce that?
That's basitarist, yeah.
Now, did you make that up?
Well, I was the exact version that I play, yes. I used to be roommates with and collaborate with this guy, Mark Sandman, who was the lead singer and two-string bass player for a band called Morphine in Boston. And he used to play it with a slide, and he had a version sitting around that you could actually play with your fingers. And when I picked that up, I just felt like, oh my gosh, this is my instrument. And so I sort of spun off from his influence and made the bass guitar my own, and then created a three-string version too. So the President's had a two-string and a three-string, and then when I do Kaspar, I play a three-string. So, but at this point, I guess after, what has it been, 30 years or 25 years of playing that way, I sort of feel like I own it. So
you should. You should just sit there. You should get a trademark and sell shirts, because people buy everything on shirts.
That's true.
Now you're from the Seattle area, and at what point did you start playing music? As a kid, were you musical, or when did this whole love of music start? Yeah,
it really started when I was about 2.5, and my older brother, who was quite a bit older, he's about 17 years older than me, he gave my parents Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band when it came out. It came out June 1st, 1967. He gave it to them for Christmas that year. And so I was 2.5, and my parents didn't really connect with the record, but I did in a big way. And I used to play that record over and over and over again and bang on the piano and try to play along when I was tiny. So, yeah, really it started when I was 2.5. When I was about 4, I started taking piano lessons, and I was sort of being groomed for a while there to be a professional piano player. I took lessons for about 10 years and got pretty into it. But once I picked up an electric guitar and plugged it into an amp and hit an open E chord, it was all over. I moved on.
Okay, now you mentioned that you lived in Boston. How did you get from Seattle to Boston?
Well, I went to school at an art college called State University of New York at Purchase, SUNY Purchase for short, in upstate New York. And the last semester I was there, there was a visiting artist, teacher guy from Boston named Chris Janney. And at the end of the semester, at the end of my college career, basically, he said, well, if any of you people want to come up to Boston and work for me, you've got a job. And so me and the drummer in my band just said, let's go. And we went up to Boston and worked for this artist for a few years. And then I became a house painter and, started bands and just sort of, fell into the Boston world. And that's where I met Mark. So, yeah.
Now, were you busking up there when you were in Boston at all?
Yeah, quite a bit in the subway. And did Harvard Square quite a few times. Just kind of Just, sort of to make enough money to buy a 12-pack of beer that night and some Indian food, and we considered that a success.
Yeah. Now, were you developing songwriting or anything at the time, or were you just up there did you have an idea you wanted to be a musician, or did you want to go into the art field seeing that you were up there with one of your teachers?
No, art was a conundrum to me. I went to art school basically to avoid music school. I didn't want to go to music school and learn how everything worked and learn all the, secrets of how music gets put together, because I had this intuitive sensation that I wanted to figure it out on my own. And so I went to art school just to avoid music school. And while I was there, I kind of, bounced around from one method of making art to another, but never really figured out what I want to do. Actually, now I'm back to making art, and I'm having a bunch of shows and kind of doing that again. So I'm finally using my degree, but at the time, definitely the focus was being a musician. I had a band, and I was writing songs, and I think I started dreaming about being a successful musician way back when I was a little kid. So, just staring at Beatles album covers and daydreaming about, I have this specific daydream that the Beatles would be sort of, running past my house on one of their adventures, and George was sick and they needed another guitar player, and they'd, tap me for the job.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So
that started when I was, 3 years old. So
it's funny because people say you don't really have memories when you're younger, and I think that's crap sometimes, because I know when I was 3 or 3.5, I was in the hospital. I got an eye operation, and I still remember the kid in the room with me had these little plastic dinosaurs, and you just don't make that stuff up. You know what I mean? And people are like, "Oh, you can't remember from when you're 3." I'm like, "Well, how would I remember this kid with brown curly hair and dinosaurs?"
Interesting. Yeah, I think even maybe more than specific circumstances or visuals, I think definitely kids remember their sort of intuitive experience from being little, like kind of the energy of it, or the, do you feel safe? Do you feel scared? You remember stuff like, going to the hospital. That's a typical, I think, early memory trigger is, something that's a little spooky or scary. So that makes sense that you would remember something from there, because that's a traumatic moment. So I believe you.
And you love the Beatles, so that makes sense for you. Now, the group Egg, what was that all about? And how'd you come up with just the name Egg? I think it's a good name, but it's just very basic, and you don't think of something, because we all eat eggs, but you just don't think about egg.
Yeah, I know, that's funny. Wow, it's interesting answering questions about egg. What a crazy thing. You can actually see videos of Egg playing at the Middle East on YouTube. Somebody archived all of those videotapes from the old days, so people want to go, they can check it out. Egg came about because when I was in art school, it was me and the drummer, and then this guy Mike, who was not a musician, but he was kind of like it's interesting. He sort of hung around the band I was in. See, did he go to school with us, or did we meet him in Boston? I can't remember. I think we met Mike in Boston, and Mike came up with the name Egg. Mike was kind of like this, what would he be analogous to? Kind of like a George Martin to our Beatles, not exactly a producer of the music, but sort of a guy that hung around the edges of what we were doing and kind of prodded us to be more interesting and take risks, and sort of gave feedback on songs and came up with the name of the band. And then we started a fanzine at the time, not fanzine, but zines, like Xeroxed little punk rock magazines were all the rage back in the, late 80s, early 90s. And we started one of those called Egg, and Mike was kind of in charge of that. So, he came up with that whole concept, and we kind of followed his lead, which is, now that I talk about it, it's kind of weird for a band to have a shadow member.
Right.
but we did.
So you're in Egg, you're in Boston, and now you eventually go to LA. What spurred that move?
actually, I went from Boston back to Seattle. I woke up one morning in Boston and realized, wait a minute, I'm from Seattle, and Seattle is beautiful, and Boston is harsh in some ways, weather being number one, and number two, just like, I don't know, I didn't feel like I could put down roots there. So I went back to Seattle. Not long after I got back to Seattle, I met Beck, who was obviously from L.A. He was up in Seattle playing some shows, and a friend introduced me, and we hit it off, and through a series of, interactions, and I actually jumped up on stage and played with him during one of his shows. He invited me to be in his band and go on tour with him right after he got signed. So I moved to L.A. to live with him and rehearse and kind of get ready for that, experience. And the Presidents had already started at that point, so I was taking a break from the Presidents, and we haven't gotten there yet. But anyway, that's how I ended up in L.A., was playing with Beck.
Now, with Beck, it may give you probably a good learning experience per se.
Yeah.
I mean, just because you're going out on the road. At that point, you just said you were already with the Presidents. When did you start the Presidents, and how did that intersect with Beck? And, I mean, how did you end up, leaving the band for just that little bit? And were you guys performing live at that time?
Yeah, we were. We started in December 93 with Jason. So Dave and I played a few shows as a duo before Jason joined in the fall of 93. And then Jason joined, and that sort of upped the game a little bit, because he was connected to the scene, and he was booking a club at the time, so he could book us into places, which was great. And so the Beck thing happened early in 94. So the band, the Presidents with Jason, was just kind of getting our sea legs. We'd recorded a demo, like a 13-song cassette, and we were selling that at the bar where Jason worked. But it wasn't like, a going concern. It wasn't like taking off. So it was an easy thing to kind of put on pause since I had this opportunity come along. I didn't know if the Presidents were going to be a big deal, or if it was just another in a long string of weird bands that I would be in. So I jumped at the chance to go on tour with Beck, because I thought it'd be a real world experience, and I'd be getting paid to make music, which was like, revolutionary, getting a salary to strum a guitar. So I jumped at that, and you're right, it was a learning experience, but less than it was less about the practicalities of being on the road and more about the sort of abstract cyclone of inner negotiations that fame necessitates. You've got to kind of figure out how you're going to handle the kind of onslaught of extra shit that comes at you when you become successful. That's outside just playing songs, writing songs, playing them live, making records. You got all this other stuff to figure out. How are you going to relate to the pressure of being a public persona? And that's the learning experience that I got with Beck, because Beck was going through that while I was sitting right next to him. And since I was the only band member not from LA, I lived with him, and we were kind of a duo, and we went around playing, like if he played a radio show or a promotional thing, it would be him and I doing it together, and we did a lot of talking about his transformation and, what that was going to be like, and I really admired the way he handled it. He kind of sobered up, he stopped drinking, he stopped smoking. He was in the back of a van with Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States, reading up on history and kind of engaging. He decided to kind of get out of his own head and get into the world and, really take advantage of what he was being offered. So that was cool. So it was kind of like I got to go to Fame School. And
right.
I got to sit next to a cyclone of fame. And then when I quit after 2 tours and went back to the Presidents, because we were selling all these demo tapes over the bar at the Comet where Jason worked, I kind of had, I learned some stuff and got to eventually experience my own fame cyclone. And so, yeah, it was cool. It was like going to success school.
Now, when you went back to Seattle, what was the music scene like? What was the pulse up there? Was it still exploding? I mean, was it still, just going crazy?
No, not as much going crazy. I mean, Kurt Cobain had died. I remember that day I was in the hospital with Beck, actually. We both had pneumonia. So we were in the hospital in St. Louis or something when we found that out. But so it was it was not the exact same scene. Of course, it wasn't on the upswing. It was more like plateaued. But the beautiful thing about that scene was there were so many people going out to see music every single night because everybody was excited about the next big thing. It was a very fertile scene. So we were playing, on a Tuesday night at the Crocodile or a Thursday at Mo, and the place was jammed, not necessarily for us, just jammed for interest. Everybody was interested. So it was a really kind of great place to plant our seed and try to grow a weird flower, which is what we did, if I may be metaphorical. And, we just had an audience every night. And since we didn't really care, we appeared not to care while simultaneously caring very deeply about our music. I think it was a nice relief for people to watch a band that just kind of, had fun and wanted everyone to party. So it was great. It was a great time. It was a very healthy time for the scene.
Now, as you said earlier, you had a 13 song demo that you would sell at shows. When did record companies start getting an interest in you guys?
Well, that would have been Bumbershoot weekend. Bumbershoot's a big festival over Labor Day weekend here in Seattle, and it was that weekend a lot of the scene, and we played at a ASCAP showcase on, I think, the Sunday night of that weekend, and I didn't know it at the time, but the place was full of major label representatives, A&R men, people, A&R women, men, and then the next day we got 7 offers from major labels. So it was literally one show that changed everything.
So you get...
It was a show in a club we played a lot, and the crowd knew us, and I think the labels kind of looked around and said, "Whoa, this connection between the band and the audience could be blown up to a national scale." So, yeah. So
the label signs you. You already have songs written, but when you go in the studio, do they want different material, or how did they come about you doing that first album?
Well, we had actually already made the first album on our own with an indie label called Pop Llama, and so it was done. But it wasn't mixed very well, and so it needed some help. And so when we signed with a major label, we licensed the record to them for 7 years. We did not take big advances or anything like that. We just said, all right, we're going to forego you guys laying out a bunch of money, and we're just going to take back our intellectual property in 7 years. And so they had nothing to say about it. We made the record. We already made the record. We just needed to remix it and, sparkle it up for the airwaves. And that was it. So it was kind of like they were working for us more than we were working for them.
Well, the songs on it are shorter, and they're great. And I wanted to ask you about Peaches, how everyone knew that song. And what were you thinking when you wrote that song? And are you amazed still that it was such a huge, huge hit?
Yeah. Well, number one, what was I thinking? I had a crush on a girl, and I took psychedelic drugs, and I went to her house to tell her that I had a crush on her. And she was not home, and I had to wait in her cartoonishly happy little yard under a peach tree, waited for about an hour, and I literally squoze rotten peaches in my fist as the psychedelics kicked in, and wrote the song. And you have to keep in mind the setting was so surreal. She lived in a very dark gray, kind of low industrial part of Cambridge in Boston. And her house looked like the house that the grandmother and Tweety Bird live in the Warner Brother cartoons. It was yellow with white trim and a picket fence and a peach tree. And I'm tripping the light fantastic. And so that's basically it. And so in that context, yes, I'm surprised it became a huge hit because I'm surprised that the whole thing worked. I mean, I distinctly remember Dave Dederer, the Git bass player, telling me at one point before Jason even joined. I think Jason had just joined the band or something, and we played a few shows with him, and Dave said something to me like, if a major label came along and wanted to give us a bunch of money to play these songs and travel all over the world, I'd do it. And I remember thinking inside myself, you are insane. Nobody's going to give us money to play these silly songs about dune buggies and peaches and kitties and lumps. And but outwardly I said, yeah, that would be great, kind of playing along. Anyway, that moment always sticks with me because it felt so improbable, and yet it happened.
It happened, and it happened huge. How long till you started feeling the momentum? And as you said earlier, you had been in, fame school from Beck, so that probably helped you a lot because you guys went on a real skyrocketed quick. When did you know that you guys were just really taking off? I mean, was there a certain moment that you said, holy crap, this is more than us playing in Seattle. This is like everybody is listening to us.
Yeah, well, I mean, that sensation happened earlier than even, the fan relationship. It was more like, we're flying to L.A. and we've got a manager and we have to interview lawyers and we have to talk to 7 major label record companies and understand how the music business works. And we immediately split into a 3-headed hydra. Dave read Donald Passman's book. I think it was called, what was that book called? Not The House on the Hill, but he wrote a book about the music business and the nuts and bolts kind of stuff. Dave read that book and became adept at reading contracts. Jason would wine and dine the A&R men and the label people until the wee hours of the night because he was late night PR. I stayed home and wrote more songs and worked on the creative angle of everything. So I guess, it kind of felt like, it felt real from the very beginning when the major labels had interest in us because we had to get very serious really fast and kind of, recognize that we were going to be in charge of a multinational corporation and not just a band. But then fan-wise, I don't have a real first distinct, memory of maybe playing a huge show. We played so many huge shows so fast that they all kind of blurred together. And frankly, I kind of like the smaller shows better. I like shows where you can see everybody's face. But, I remember playing to countless people on a shut-down racetrack in Europe, and I could not see the end. I couldn't see where the people stopped, and I definitely remember thinking, this is huge, and I'm barely able to ride this monster.
Now, as your as the first album comes out, do you remember the first time you heard one of your songs on the radio, and what song was it?
I have a distinct memory, but it's not of the radio. It's of MTV, which is more like what I grew up listening to in a way. I remember being on my honeymoon with my first wife in Hawaii in 1995, fall of 95, and watching MTV on the little TV in our cabana, and there was some sort of top 10 video countdown, like, here are the top 10 hottest videos, and we were right in between, Destiny's Child and Janet Jackson. And I was like, what the hell is my silly little rock band doing sandwiched in between those two superstars? Yeah, it was bizarre. So that's a distinct memory where we're swimming in the actual waters here.
Now,
another early when we were with the in the major label negotiation portion, we had a very serious business meeting with Madonna about signing up on Maverick, her label at the time, and she really got us. She really understood our thing and understood that we cared a lot about what we were doing and that we were talented at making this music, and even though it looked easy and it seemed like a toss-off, that it was actually hard work. And so her kind of getting it and validating it, and we had a great time sort of chilling with her, and she gave me some really good advice and stuff like that. So that was a moment too where I was like, oh, okay, I'm having a business meeting with Madonna. This is real.
Now, what was your let's say, relationship with MTV? You know, because as you said, we watched MTV videos all the time when we were younger, and now they're not on anymore. But what was the whole process for you shooting the videos? Was it a fun time? Because I've talked to some people who just say, you know, it was a pain in the ass. Some people loved it. What was it like for you guys when you first started making those videos?
It was hard because, you know, it reminds me of a Mitch Hedberg joke. He's like, you know, he's talking about how he does stand-up, and these people come from TV networks and watch his stand-up, and then they want him to write a sitcom. And he's like, well, just because I can do stand-up doesn't mean I can do sitcom. It's like, oh, you're a chef. Do you farm?
Right.
So it's analogous to that, meaning like, oh, you're in a band? Can you make little movies? You know, like, making videos is not something that is intuitive when you compare it to what it's like to just like go to a rehearsal space and learn some songs and book a show and play and have a connection with the audience. That's like what we loved. Even making records was kind of difficult for us, kind of bottling our energy. But bottling it and putting something visual to it was really confusing for us. Luckily, we had Roman Coppola, Francis Ford Coppola's son, to come up with some awesome ideas. He came up with the ninja attack in Peaches, and he made the Lump video and, you know, wanted to represent Seattle in that video. And Roman was great. He was like 50-50. Half the videos we made with him were brilliant, and half were so bad that we never released them.
Okay.
So,
So the band, it's when you start getting heat, I mean, you're getting huge. How does the touring change? Do you start getting, you know, you tour the world. I mean, are you more liked in some places? Like I've talked to guys in metal bands who say in Japan everybody loves them, and they even just also in South America because the fans just show up and you're like, what? How they hear we're coming? You know, because it was before the internet. What was your experience when you started getting in Europe and other places? Who liked you the most, and who did you think, you know, where did you draw the biggest crowds?
Well, number one, we never toured before we got signed, so we had nothing to compare it to. The only touring any of us did before we got signed was me touring with Beck, and that was a phenomenon, you know, like crazy nuts. So I've never battled it out in the trenches, you know, club to club, trying to build something with a band. I've only toured when the band is already hot. So I don't really have anything to compare it to, but as far as, you know, America goes, I mean, Seattle was huge for us, of course. The Southeast loved us, which was interesting, you know, like Birmingham, Alabama, and North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, those kind of places, we were just super loved. In Europe, definitely Ireland was a big deal, and I remember when I was a busker in Boston, everybody not everybody, but a lot of people said, you should go to Ireland. I was like, really? And so eventually we got there, and that was gigantic. But I think the real, you know, European home away from home for us is the Paradiso in Amsterdam. That's our, I mean, I get kind of goosebumps just thinking about it. We had so many religious experiences in that club over the years, from the beginning all the way through, and just great people run that place, and we love Amsterdam, and we love that club. So that was kind of our hottest spot. Our least hot spot was the Logo in Hamburg. Was it Hamburg? I think it was Hamburg. Hey, Katie, was that Hamburg? Oh, she's gone. My wife's in the background. She did merch for us for years, so I was going to ask her. But anyway, I think it's Hamburg, the Logo. We kept playing this tiny, absolutely hot, sweaty, disgusting club all the way when we were super hot, all the way to when we were not, and we never could get a better booking. For some reason, the major label, Sony, had this idea that we should be huge in Germany, and they just kept sending us back to Germany. And the Germans didn't want us. The Germans wanted rock.
Right.
They didn't want rock and roll. They wanted rock.
They wanted Scorpions.
Exactly. But some staffer at Columbia's job was to break us in Germany, and I remember sitting her down at a lunch one time, like, you've sent us to Germany 5 times in the last year. Meanwhile, we're losing momentum in the U.S. What the hell is wrong with you? And she kind of confided after a glass of wine. She was like, if I don't break you in Germany, I'll lose my job.
Oh, wow.
So that was kind of an eye-opener. It's like, all right, nobody cares about us here, really. They care about the dollars we're generating, but nobody cares about our health or well-being. You know, all that international travel was making us sick. We were getting bronchitis. We were exhausted. Anyway, so, you know.
Your first album went triple platinum. Now, that puts a lot of pressure on you for the second album. Did you feel that pressure? And, you know, where did you start writing when your first album was such a huge success?
Well, we just cracked open the rock and roll cliche brochure and went ahead and made a weak second record. We were just following it's what it said to do next. It's like, get exhausted, don't take a break, make a weak second record. Okay, all right, let's do it. We just did the cliche thing. We were under pressure from the record company to make another record, and we should have taken a year off and just had our lives back, because all the good vibes on that debut were born out of having a good life and just being with our friends and our family and, you know, playing Frisbee in the park and, you know, playing a house party on a Friday night or something. So we should have reset, but we didn't. And so, we sound tired, and we didn't come up with a bunch of fresh songs. In fact, a lot of those songs were songs from when we made the first record that didn't make it on the first record. So it was a little bit of cleaning house, and I always call the second record a really great EP that's trying to be a record. Then again, I put it on like a year ago, and I loved it.
Well, there you go.
It was awesome. Yeah, so who knows? You know, I think the people that love that record love it, you know, in the context of equaling or topping the first. That might have been an impossible task to begin with. So, you know.
Now, how did it come about that you played for Clinton? Was it because of your band's name?
Exactly, yeah. I don't know how we actually got the gig, but or who set it up. But, we opened up for him in Seattle at the Pike Place Market. He came into, I think it was midterm elections, and so he came in to stump for the Democrats, and, we opened up for him. And we met him and hung out with him, and it was a kind of an interesting experience. I definitely like to say that when you shook Bill Clinton's hand, it was a full-body sexual experience. He's one of those politicians that's got that essential quality, which is when you are interacting with him, he makes you feel like you're the only person in the room. So that was the sensation. So.
Now you guys broke up. Was that just because you wanted to have free time, or you wanted to work on your own music? What did the breakup? What was the breakup about?
Well, you know, I never really wanted to be in a big, loud rock and roll band. It just it was not what was interesting to me about that band. I liked that band because in the early days, you know, Jason had no cymbals in the drum kit. I was playing a little weird two-string guitar. Dave was playing. I mean, our guitars together were worth about $125. Terrible amplifiers. Everything sounded like rubber bands. And yet, we tried to rock. You know, we would do an Aerosmith cover or an AC/DC cover or Billy Squier or something. And it was funny because it was these three skinny dorks trying to rock, and that was interesting to me. Then we get signed, we get real gear, we go on big shows, and then we're just a rock band. I mean, of course, we're still playing these funny, interesting songs. They just had more muscle behind them, and to me, that tipped the scales, and I immediately wanted out. I tried to convince the guys, let's just pull a Sex Pistols and break up right away and just freeze ourselves in this perfect state. And, of course, it didn't happen, and I kind of softened on my, stance that was the best thing to do, and we just kept going and going and going. But the entire time in the back of my mind, I had this little voice saying, there's something else you're supposed to be doing. It's not this. This is great, and congratulations, but you got to keep digging. You got to keep trying to figure out what it is you're supposed to be doing. And so I did. For 15, 20 years on the side, outside the Presidents, I started other bands. I tried recording all sorts of different kinds of songs, different kinds of ways, collaborations. nothing really clicked. And then, about 10 years ago, I started dating my second wife. And her art, she's an amazing artist. Her name's Kate Endle, Endle. And her art had this, like, shiny, happy, well-constructed, silly, she's making faces at me now. It had all the adjectives that I used to describe her art were the adjectives that I wanted to use to describe this elusive music that I was supposed to be making. So I started making art directly inspired by her. I started making music directly inspired by her art. And after a few days of tinkering around with that, a giant light bulb went off over my head, and I realized, I should be making children's music. And it was this incredible feeling of, like, relief. Like, that's it. I found it. It's amazing. Also, the relief was like, if I would do children's music, I will be immune to the culture of cool, the culture of what's hot, like, you don't have to be on the radio or, the topic of the week to sell records to families. It's a way more kind of, in the trenches kind of making music that's useful for families and helps them relieve stress and connect. And I have the challenge is I got to write songs that the parent and the child are both going to love. And anyway, the sensation was completely like coming home. And so for about 6 years, I did the Kaspar Babypants kids thing and the Presidents at the same time. And because we had reunited. So we broke up in 98 for 5 years. We reunited. And then later on, I found the Kaspar thing. So, I know this is kind of chronologically jumping around, but basically we broke up because it's kind of like, you can't find the job you're supposed to have if you don't quit the job you don't like. So I realized after a while, I've got to quit this rock band. I've got to make space, and I've got to try to figure out what this other thing is. And so I did. And I didn't figure it out, and we got back together, and then I did figure it out, and then we broke up again.
Now, how'd you come up with the name Kaspar Babypants?
It's an old nickname from when I was in that band. I was in a band with Mark Sandman, the guy that showed me the two-string, called Supergroup, and it was my stage name, and I wore a pair of baby's pants on my head. You can find pictures of that online, too. I lost the baby pants, unfortunately, and I've got a song that'll be coming out on a future Kaspar album called The Ballad of the Baby Pants about whatever happened to them. I don't know, but yeah, so it was my old stage name, and when I went to make kids music, I thought, well, what am I going to call it? My name, make up a band name, and then I remembered, oh, wait a minute, I'm already Kaspar Babypants. So there you go. 20-year-old nickname resurfaces.
Now, how do you go about writing kids music? Because, you have to write for kids. Kids can be so fickle. How do you figure out when you sit down to write? Do you sit there and say, writing for kids? It's like when the Flintstones came out. The Flintstones was written for adults, but the kids loved the, Fred's voice and Kazoo and all that. But as you mentioned earlier, the parents have to like it too. But when you sit down to write a song specifically for kids, how do you do that and also make sure that the parents find it interesting, and then even it can't be offensive at all?
No. Well, so there's a few things going on there. Well, number one, the Flintstones is the honeymooners, so you got that going on. So that's why the parents liked it, because, it's Ralph Cramden, it's Fred Flintstone, basically. Secondly, I write songs for 0 to 6-year-olds. So I write songs for kids before they become cynical, before they understand what's cool and what's not cool, before they become jerks, before they become, sort of defined by how they're different from others. I like to get at them. My ideal people are like 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3. That range, they're just so delightful, and they're so beautiful and silly and weird and surreal. And so I avoid that problem by just not making music for older kids. And as far as connecting with the parents, I don't do it by being sort of like Toy Story 2 style, where like I put in cultural jokes for the parents. I do it more by drawing influence from super old music, from like the 1800s, folk music, blues, prison work songs, slave chants, that kind of stuff, all the way up to, that's one spot where I get inspiration, so that the music sounds human. Like it sounds, and it's hard to explain, but I think a lot of that music was written out of necessity to elevate a otherwise dark and sometimes dangerous and deadly existence. Like, if you're a slave or if you're a prisoner on a chain gang in 1895, that song that you're singing while you're breaking rocks might be the difference between life and death, keeping you connected to the feeling of being human. So I'll listen to that, and I'll kind of take the rhythm of it or the cadence or the melody or something about it and kind of start, spinning off into my own thing and add my own bizarre lyrics about bugs or food or animals or whatever. And so that's one way I do it. The other way is I've written all these songs over my life, just like thousands of songs and fragments that never found a band or a home. So I've been listening back over all those and realizing, oh, that's trying to be a Kaspar song, and that's trying to be a Kaspar song. And I found so many old songs that were unconsciously stabbing at that, kids music thing, but I had no concept of it, so I missed it, So there's that, and, I make this, I really am writing songs that make me happy. I'll put in a Kaspar album in the car when I'm driving around, and I love it, because it's, musically also I kind of try to make it sophisticated enough and layered enough where an adult can listen to it and be satisfied aesthetically just simply by the music. Like sometimes if the lyrics are real repetitive and childlike, I'll let the music kind of be more complex. But if the lyrics get kind of story-like and complex and kind of deep, thicker rhymes, I'll keep the music simple. So it's become this challenge, this craft and artistic challenge to kind of make this music work for grown-ups and kids. And it's so endlessly challenging that my 16th record is coming out in August. So
I was thinking, I'm on your website. I'm on the babypantsmusic.com. And there's so many, your production is just insane. How many albums you put out? Because, you talk to, I talked to Steve Hackett a few weeks ago from Genesis, but he was on a solo career, and he's puts out album after album. But you have, there's tons of them. How long does it take you to put one of these albums together?
Well, see, I don't actually sit down and make an album. I'm just constantly recording and working on songs, and I have this ginormous batch that I'm constantly kind of shepherding toward completion. So I'll listen to them all, and I'll say, okay, that song needs to be in a different key, and that song needs to be a lullaby, not a rocker, and that song needs to be rewritten from a different perspective, or that song just needs the bass to come up a little bit, and it's done. Or there's all these different states that they're in. And then when it comes time to make a record, I just skim the cream of the crop off of that giant batch of songs. I just take all the ones that are so awesome and feel so good and are so solid and put them on a record. And then that batch just gets replenished. And right now the batch is up to 72, I think. I've got 72 unreleased songs that I'm massaging into shape for future records. So I'm way ahead of myself at this point, which is why I'm taking a little bit of a step back and doing visual art for a while, because I'm way ahead of the game, because I'm going to put out a record every August for the next 3 years, and I've already got them recorded. So
Now, how do you come about the video? I watched just a little bit of the Crab song, the Crab video. I found it on YouTube. Do you have input in the video, or do you do it because you're a visual artist now? How do you come about the video? Because, once again, it has to be for kids, and it's not like your old videos where it's you guys jamming. You have to have a kid sit there and go, I like this. Do you have input in the videos, or do you make them yourself?
Both. I'm the ones that are hand drawn with just black lines and very crudely animated. Those are all I do, just with sheets of paper and a pen and a camera, and just put them together in iMovie. Believe it or not, an old version of iMovie. Thanks, Apple, for canceling the only thing about iMovie that was awesome. Let's see. But some of them I hire people like, that's Charlotte. She's in the UK, and she works. She's a animator on her own. I found her online. I just emailed her and said, "Hey, you want to make me a video?" And we worked it out. I paid her, and in that case, with Pretty Crabby, she sent me, like pictures of what the crab was going to look like, and a rough cut of it that I gave a little feedback on. But then some of the animated ones, like I work with a crew in New Zealand called Muck Putty, and sometimes they'll just do the whole thing without me seeing a lick of it. And then sometimes I'm more involved, and I'll look at a storyboard and we'll kind of hash it out. But one distinctive thing about my videos is I'm not in any of them. One of my ideas is that I want the videos to support the world of the song, and that doesn't mean showing my face and me playing music, I feel like that would take people out of the magic of the song. So one of the things I'm doing with this Kaspar thing is really trying to put the songs forward and make songs that are have a life of their own outside of supporting my celebrity. I'm not trying to be famous with this music at all. I'm just really trying to make stuff that helps families reduce stress, and hoping that helps the world be a better place.
Now, how do you do live shows?
Oh yeah, I've done almost 1,200 live shows for Kaspar.
Now, what is that like? You go from playing, as you say, playing from, when you said you couldn't even see the end of the stage, to kids who have very little kids who have a very short attention span. Are they just fascinated with you, so they just sit there and stare as you play and just enjoy it? I mean, how do you connect with them? Because I always do that with kids. I always connect with kids. I make them smile. Of course, you have to watch yourself when you're at the mall and you're joking around with the kid because parents think, who's this weirdo with the, But for me, how do you connect with the kids, and do you feel like a fun energy from them?
Well, I'm kind of a big kid. I mean, I feel like the goal of my life as an adult is to hold on to what it's like to be curious and intuitive and silly and, not to fully grow up. So I kind of relate to them just as little people who are awesome little people. To me, they're like little Buddhas. They're like little enlightened humans, They are free with themselves. They are honest. If they don't like what you're doing, they won't join in, and if they do, they'll be there wholeheartedly. When I get a hug from a little kid after a show, it's the most genuine hug I've ever gotten. It just feels like they really are, loving what I'm trying to do. So it's cool. So as far as the crowd responses, there's a huge range. So I have so many songs, and I never make a set list. So I just get up in front of the audience and I get a vibe of what they want to do. Sometimes they want to dance, so here we go. We're going to play a bunch of dancey songs. And sometimes after about 5 dancey songs, I can see them kind of like, huffing and puffing. All right, let's take it down. And so, and sometimes it's an afternoon show at a library or something, and they just want to hear story songs and kind of be, told little stories, so I'll do that. Sometimes they want to do call and response and sing a lot. Sometimes the energy's kind of dissipated and there's no singing going on, so I don't do them. So yeah, I can customize. One of the things I love about the Kaspar thing is I can be totally in the moment at the shows and present and not trying to execute a plan and kind of win them over. I'm trying to collaborate with them and see what they want to do so that we can make something happen together. So now, it's cool.
Now, of all those shows with the kids, have you ever had like a hell gig? One that just got out of control with the kids?
You mean like got out of control yeah, I've had a couple versions of gotten out of control. One time I played when my popularity was really starting to soar in Seattle at a festival in West Seattle called Summerfest, and they just set me up on a street corner with a PA, no stage, and I was absolutely mobbed. And I was sitting on a stool too, so I was low, so the whole crowd was just crushing into me. And at one point, the kids, I have my music, or I have my songs on a music stand because I don't memorize them because there's so many. and kids are like tearing the music stand apart and moving my microphone around, and all of a sudden the sound goes like squealy crazy, and I turn around and the guy, the hippie dude that was supposed to be running sound for me had disappeared, and there was a kid. This is summertime, so it's hot out, and there's a little kid who's barely walking in a big overstuffed diaper with curly blonde hair and nothing else, just moving all the knobs and faders on the soundboard. I was like, that's about the nuttiest situation I've ever been in. So, and it was kind of dangerous and weird. So I've definitely graduated now. I'm doing more theaters and kind of, seated places like that, so it's a little less nuts. I still get nutty shows, but after 1,200 shows, I'm kind of ready to sit on a stage and have good sound and play.
Now, besides your Kaspar site, you have your own site, which is your .org, your chrisballew.org. The pictures, I'm looking at your art gallery right now. How do you? I know you said it was based on your wife's drawings or paintings or her artwork, but they're cool looking. They're very different, and they're they have that almost, to me, some of them have almost like that Keith Haring feel.
Oh yeah.
How did you? What made you decide to finally just get back to art? Is it just relaxing for you? And how are people enjoying them? Because they're very cool looking.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. Also, I got to qualify. These are from like 4 years ago. And I have since, my style has gotten denser and more intense. And so I look at these and I'm kind of like, oh, these are old. Don't look at these. But anyway, which I guess is how every artist should feel as they progress. So these things are, so when I was in art school, I did these shapes over and over. I did these kind of like flowy shapes that I didn't understand. They're kind of like ribbony lines. And I just didn't know what they were for, and I couldn't figure out what context to put them in, and so I just kind of forgot about it. And then about 6 years ago, or 5 years ago, Katie and I were in Michigan, and we were in a bookstore, and she handed me a calendar of Cape Dorset Inuit printmaking. Specifically, there's an artist, Kenojuak Ashevak, and I looked at her work, and it just set off a bizarre sensation. I was like, that's it. That's what I was trying to draw. She's a printmaker from Baffin Island, Cape Dorset, but she's very abstract and kind of draws these energy lines coming off of animals and stuff. And it just really struck a chord with me, and I suddenly kind of started applying. So I do Qigong. I do like a meditation kind of Tai Chi thing every day, and one of the exercises I work on as I do that is kind of ego management. You have these voices in your head telling you things, and not like I'm insane, not those kind of voices, but like, you start telling your narrative of yourself in your head with these extra voices. And one of the challenges is kind of taming those voices, or understanding that they're not really you, that you can you can dialogue with them and change your story and change your perception of yourself. And so these kind of started out of that, in that they kind of became these two-dimensional representations of states of meditation and of course sort of ego work, I guess you'd call it. Like I always think of the phrase, let go my ego. So anyway, this is obviously the visual art is kind of in its infancy, and I see a long road ahead of that. In fact, I kind of feel like it might be my third act, is doing more visual art. So, that's kind of that in a nutshell. And yeah, it's very different from the kids' music thing. It's more complex. It's more weird and spooky and kind of, open-ended. But it's very relaxing, and I really love doing it. And I've got 3 shows coming up in the next year that I'm getting ready for.
Now, when you do a show, do they say, who you are, or do they just say an artist? I mean, I'm sure the gallery or wherever you're at want people to come, and you have a name. How do they promote that?
I'm not sure. I've only done 2 shows, and neither were in a gallery. I'm kind of following Kate's lead, and I'm not going the gallery route. Galleries are kind of hard to deal with. It takes a long time to get into that world, and they take 50% of what you sell. So I'm following Kate's thing, and there's a lot of great kind of cafes, restaurants, bars, places like that. I'm going to show them there. They're going to be prints. They're going to be affordable, somewhere in the $50 to $70 range, so people can take them home after they've had 5 drinks and they want one. I like putting art in those spaces too, because that's where people eat and commune and hang out, and it's less about sort of separating the visuals, separating the art from daily life. I want to insert it into daily life. So as far as promotion, it's sort of built in. People are streaming in and out of restaurants and cafes and bars all the time. So, there they are.
Well, that's awesome. And your website, people go to chrisballew.org, and it has your art.
Yeah, and I should mention, too, that there's tons of free music on that website from Egg, that you mentioned before, and other collaborations like the Giraffes, Chris and Tad. I make this kind of funky, weird, cut-up-y dance music I call Sampledelic. There's all kinds of stuff on there for free that I was gathering dust, and I just decided to release for anyone who wants it. So make use of that.
What is Creepy Stick?
Creepy Stick is me and my friend Dave Thiele. I've known him since he was born, and I was 4 years old. My very, very, very first band experience was called David and the Overtones, and it was me on a piano and Dave on drums. And so we've been making music together our whole lives, and never released anything. Dave, it's an interesting musical relationship. I've always jammed and kind of had these, maybe we have a bunch of riffs that we'll depend on, and then we'll make up new stuff. But we never tried to be a band. We never tried to do anything real or record what we did. We just allowed it to be this free-form kind of dirgy, heavy rock, kind of trancey rock thing that we do. So that's what that is. And we managed to make a record. And then we used to have a sax player that we collaborated with, and he's back on the scene, and he's helping us put some of our old little handheld tape recorder stuff and 4-track stuff out after he's kind of messed with it. So there's some new Creepy Stick stuff, which is crazy.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time. People, go to his website. It's chrisballew.org. It's Ballew. And the other website, especially if you have kids, and the videos are just fun. If you're hanging out and you want to just chill out and watch something fun, his videos are up there. Go to babypantsmusic.com. And also, people, go to my website, people. It's coopertalk.net. I have over 720 episodes up there. You can email me at coopertalk.net. And you can follow me on Twitter. That's at CooperTalk. So remember, I'm Steve Cooper. I'm only as hip as my guest. Don't forget, drink your water, eat your vegetables, and I'll talk to you guys next week.